Chapter 3. But nobody came. To say Shuichi was upset was a severe understatement. In lack of a better term, he was pissed. As he promised himself, he stayed up all night, standing guard outside the hangar. He managed to turn away Himiko just in time, helping her work through her worries about the mission tomorrow, and sending her off to bed with her doubts lifted. K1B0 was a lot more difficult to turn away, but he eventually did when Shuichi offered to do his task for him, with the flimsy excuse that Kokichi was much friendlier towards him and not K1B0, and so he was more likely to listen to Shuichi. Maki never showed up. He wasn't sure if that was because she saw him guarding the door, or if he had legitimately persuaded her, but Shuichi didn't see her all night. He assumed it was that first option. Then the morning came. Shuichi rushed back to his bedroom to grab his electro-hammer and joined his friends at the dining hall. Maki was glaring at him hard enough to make his head explode, and K1B0 was giving him an undeniably curious look. But he didn't care. He had been so stupidly hopeful. He had really thought that this one could be it. After 7 attempts, none of his friends would die, and these time loops would be over, and Shuichi could, preferably, go to sleep. But nope. They opened the shutter, and wouldn't you know it, blood everywhere. Coat sleeve visible in the press, clean of any small holes. Shuichi wasn't too happy about the loop, but it was fine. Everything was okay, and his spirits weren't entirely crushed. Only mostly. He had been partially expecting that to happen, and at least he had managed to extract a few answers. 1. It was indeed possible to successfully turn his classmates away from the hangar. 2. That would not stop Kaito from dying. And 3. Something other than Maki's attack is what tipped Kokichi off. Was it Kaito's attack? Shuichi doubted Kaito would give up on a challenge simply because he had no weapon. He'd be at a significant disadvantage, yes, but Shuichi sincerely doubted something like that would stop Kaito. Or maybe Kokichi caught wind of the upcoming mission, and so he decided to strike first. Who knows? Maybe Kokichi simply got bored. He was a remnant of despair, after all. All of that is why Shuichi was back in the hangar now. He was way too out of it to even think about trying to persuade his classmates all over again. So he was waiting until Maki fled the scene after her failure to deliver the antidote. His hiding spot was the room with the 3 remaining exosouls, which were still stomping in endless circles around Monokuma. Each thud of their footsteps shook Shuichi to his very core, as if the very ground was trembling beneath his feet. But it was at least a good way to keep him from falling asleep. He hadn't slept in over 24 hours now. He was sure of it. Nighttime in the academy lasted 10 hours, and he had stayed awake all throughout the night in that previous loop. Now, he was here again, not sleeping, and having no plans to. This might be a bad idea, but, as Shuichi had stated before, he wanted to end these loops as fast as possible. So even if he was exhausted and hungry, and his entire body was running on nothing but determination, he would push himself forward, because he could only consciously let his friend die so many times before it started to take a toll on his sanity. Just as he was wondering when he would get the chance to sleep, the exosouls suddenly stopped. It was a bit of a jarring transition, going from constant sound to complete silence, but it served as a good time marker. Kokichi set off the electro bomb. Another few minutes passed, and there was a flash of red. Shuichi snapped back to attention in time to watch as Maki fled back down the hall, knife in hand, and tears in her eyes. As bad as Shuichi felt for letting this happen yet again, he needed answers. He needed to understand that natural course. So, without a moment to lose, Shuichi hurried in the direction she had come from, beelining for the bathroom window. As he arrived, he heard someone murmuring, "Slowly, dummy." Then Breathe out. Shuichi pressed himself against the wall next to the window. Maki roll? Nishi? Nope, just me. Ugh, what the fuck? Did you do what? You blacked out for a sec, but don't worry. I won't let you die. You have to cooperate with a little plan of mine, okay?
Plan? Echoed Kaito. What plan?
There was a shuffling of clothing as Shuichi assumed the two of them stood up. I've been thinking this whole time of a plan to throw the mastermind off guard, Kokichi explained breathily.
Throw them off guard?
Kaito demanded, unknowingly seeming to share Shuichi's confusion.
What are you talking about? You're the mastermind!
Oh, Kokichi murmured, as if it was something he had forgotten. That was a lie. I only pretended to be the mastermind.
Pretended?
And you fell for it, Kokichi sang, his voice layered with simultaneous amusement and weariness. Shuichi had to cover his mouth with his trembling hand to keep himself quiet.
Pretended? He pretended to be the mastermind? No, he could be lying. He might just be lying to get Kaito to work with him.
I stole your heart, so now I'm satisfied. I don't need to steal your life anymore.
Those words had been so warm. His hand was so warm.
Thoughts. Too many fuzzy, warm thoughts. He needed to banish those from his mind and pay attention.
What the hell?
Kaito gawked as Kokichi finished listing off all of his set-up actions.
Why'd you do all that?
The reason why I pretended to be the mastermind was to end this boring killing game. Shuichi blinked at the wall.
To end it?
Kaito parroted his thoughts aloud. I thought that if I showed you the despairing truth, you guys wouldn't want to go outside anymore. Kokichi had to pause to take in a deep breath. I thought it would end the killing game. But instead, this happened. I'm gonna die by Maki's hands.
My hands, Shuichi's mind whispered. I didn't do anything again. I could have stopped this, just like... If I was paying attention, I could have stopped Kaede. I did this. It was me.
No, Shuichi was letting this happen to stop it in the next loop. He had to let this play out. Otherwise, he'd be fumbling around uselessly in the next loop. But God, did it hurt to listen to now. Why do you think this happened? Kokichi continued to question. Why do you think Maki tried to kill me? Why do you think the game started again?
Why?
Kaito dared to ask. Because the true mastermind instigated it. I'm certain of it. They made a move without us noticing.
The true mastermind? Instigated it? So, whoever that person is, they also instigated Maki's actions too? If Kokichi isn't the mastermind, then who is the true mastermind?
Kaito asked exactly what Shuichi was thinking. Who knows? I don't know either. But it doesn't matter. We can't lose. This game is pointless unless you win. That's why I thought of a special plan. When I'm on the verge of losing, my plan will help me win. Everything clicked together, like a perfect puzzle, finally connecting. Shuichi was suddenly sure that Kokichi wasn't lying. That move the mastermind made had to have been the flashback light in the dining hall, the one that allowed them to remember every last detail. It's why they knew about Kokichi being a remnant of despair in the first place. While he wasn't sure how to explain Kokichi's status as a remnant of despair, Kokichi not being the mastermind would answer something else that had been bothering him. The motive behind Tsurugi's murder. Death was a looming thought on Shuichi's mind,
especially now, when he knew Kaito was going to die here, very, very soon. He could suppress the terrifying feeling of utter nothingness, having everything with you at one moment, and it suddenly being ripped away from you in the next. How many times had Kaito died now? Because Shuichi was busy, using these time loops as a resource. How many times? No, that wasn't the point. The point was that he had been puzzling over Sumugi's motive ever since it happened, and he never had a concrete answer. All he had was speculation, and that wasn't a very powerful tool in this case. However, this revelation might have inadvertently solved that entire problem. It was an awful thought, one that made Shuichi's heart ache to contemplate, but placing Sumugi in the role of mastermind would give him a plausible reason for his death. The more he thought about it, the more it made sense. If Sumugi was the one to instigate the murder, as Kokichi had said, then of course she'd be alarmed when Shuichi came to her, talking about how he wanted to stop that very thing. The killing game had gone into a deadlock because of Kokichi's manipulation. She was probably secretly delighted when Shuichi brought it up. Truthfully, Shuichi doubted she believed him about the time loop in the first place. She probably wouldn't have killed him if she did, knowing her actions wouldn't be permanent. Shuichi has to close his eyes for a moment. How did the first person he told about his predicament end up being the mastermind? I might be wrong, Shuichi reminded himself. He wanted to be wrong, because admittedly, he had very little evidence to incriminate Sumugi. But what he did have fit the picture all too well. There was always the chance that Shuichi's sleep-deprived brain was just screwing with him too. In fact, he was pretty sure he almost passed out simply from closing his eyes. I don't really get it, but is this the plan to throw off the mastermind? Kaito's voice drew Shuichi back into reality, and he remembered that, oh yeah, this conversation was important. Well, it's not that difficult, Kokichi said, all too casually, for what came out of his mouth next. Kaito, I need you to kill me. Shuichi's mind came to a screeching halt. What? Kaito sputtered. Are you out of your goddamn mind? I've been thinking about this for a while. Come here. I'll show you. I have it all written out. But you, will need to drag me. I am, very faint. Shit, man! Their voices faded as, he assumed, Kaito dragged Kokichi out of the bathroom. He could still hear them very faintly, but not enough to make out any words. That was the least of his concerns, though. He now knew everything he needed to. His current problem was that he may have fundamentally misjudged this entire case. Kaito. He wants Kaito to kill him? Shuichi's mind was reeling. Everything he had been assuming about this murder was wrong. This wasn't a typical murder-victim dynamic. These two worked together to carry out Kokichi's murder? It wasn't Kaito who died. That was only sinking in now. Kaito survived. No wonder Shuichi had failed last time. Whether he kept his friend out of the hangar or not, Kokichi would still propose this plan to Kaito, who would accept regardless of the circumstances. In fact, he knew Kaito would accept, because that is exactly what happened last time. Knowing he wouldn't be hearing anything else from Kaito and Kokichi, Shuichi pushed himself off the wall, nearly knocking himself over in the process, and began his somewhat wobbly journey back to his bedroom. There was one last thing he wanted to do in this loop, and for that, he'd need his electro hammer. Then, he would end this loop and continue to the next, which would hopefully be his final one. By the time he had walked all the way to his bedroom to grab his electro hammer, and all the way back to the hangar, which took much longer than he'd like, his legs felt like jello. All-nighters usually didn't feel this terrible, but that might be because he was being more physically active. Also, he was pretty sure he hadn't eaten anything since this started. Maybe he should do that. Whoops, his thoughts went off track. But, lucky for him, the effects of the electro bomb were still active, so all he had to do was tap the control panel with his hammer. That easily overrode the ridiculously long password, and he was able to safely open the shutter. Luckily for him, it seemed the deed was already done. There was an overabundance of blood seeping from the hydraulic press, and Kaito's coat sleeve was present as always. He wasn't sure where Kaito could have gone, but he supposed it didn't matter right now. Time to investigate the scene. First, Shuichi was interested in the murder weapon, the hydraulic press. From the looks of it, the power cord had been severed, so there was no way anyone was going to be able to lift the press ever again. Shuichi didn't bother to test this. It'd be a waste of energy. The coat sleeve itself must serve as a diversion of sorts. Everyone would believe that Kokichi was the mastermind, and that he had killed Kaito with his own 2 hands. This plan was to supposedly throw off the true mastermind. Shuichi still wasn't sure how this murder accomplished that goal, but he was sure answers would come in time. Maybe he could ask Kokichi himself, knowing he wasn't the mastermind. That thought was strangely relieving. Kokichi, someone who had intrigued him for the entire killing game, wasn't the evil, despicable person he tried to make himself out to be. He had used himself as a scapegoat to try and end the killing game for good. But that didn't confirm that he wasn't a remnant of despair. In that case, it became all too convenient that a remnant of despair just so happened to falsely usurp the mastermind's role. Though, the more he thought about it, he simply remembered that Kokichi was a remnant of despair, trying to carry on Junko Enoshima's legacy. How did he learn that, before his memories were erased? Shaking his head, Shuichi decided to move on. Thinking was hurting his head, and he wasn't even sure if he was doing that correctly. His thoughts were sluggish and frustratingly slow. So, maybe he should save the critical thinking for when he had a good night's sleep. The next area was glaringly obvious, and not just because of the long trail of blood that led from there to the hydraulic press. The bathroom was where all of this had started, and so it was only fitting that Shuichi checked out what was in there. Then he'd trigger the body discovery announcement and move on to the next loop. Simple as that. In the bathroom, there was quite a bit of evidence. A crossbow lay on the ground, likely Kaito's, as well as a black case, an empty glass bottle, and 3 bloody crossbow arrows. This would have been the scene he found in the morning, once the investigation officially began with his friends. He blinked down at the blood on the floor, then at the arrows. 2 out of the 3 of those arrows were poisoned. Shuichi's fingers twitched. He died once, and it wasn't pleasant. He was sure he'd hate death a lot less if he stayed dead. Maybe if he... No. Shuichi shook his head aggressively and hurried out of the bathroom, feeling ill. It was too early to be thinking about such terrible things. Not everything was hopeless yet. He could still save his friends, Kaito, Maki, and Kokichi. Then he could find evidence that Tsumugi was the mastermind, not Kokichi, and this entire killing game would end for good. And then, maybe, he could take a very long nap. Shuichi would like that. In all honesty, Shuichi hardly registered the walk back to the dormitory. He was so tired, and having absolutely nothing in his system was doing him no favors. This next time would be the last. He would make sure of it. The plan was a bit of a risky one, but it was the best he could come up with in his current condition. This plan all relied on Maki. The first doorbell he rang was K1B0's. He rang it over and over, just to ensure he'd actually wake up. Shuichi had been careful not to be spotted by the robot while in the hangar, so K1B0 was a safe bet. K1B0 always was a safe bet. As he wondered who the second person he should wake up was, K1B0 opened his door, looking groggy. His blue eyes seemed dimmer than usual, somehow even more lifeless than before. Shuichi? K1B0 murmured. What do you need at this hour? Our mission is tomorrow. You should be getting rest. And why do you have your electro hammer? Sorry. Shuichi's voice was quiet, briefly startling, even himself. I need you for something, if that's okay. What is it? K1B0, reasonably uncertain, inquired. Someone's dead in the exosol hangar. The words left his mouth before he could stop them, but at least it woke K1B0 up right away. His eyes flew wide open, and he gasped in horror. Someone is dead? K1B0 exclaimed. Who? What? When? Go look, Shuichi advised. I'll wake up everyone else. The shutter should be open, so hurry. But if it's closed, here. He shoved his electro hammer into his friend's hands. Use this and get in. K1B0 didn't waste a single second. He nodded firmly, gripping Shuichi's electro hammer as he booked it out of the dormitory. That was at least one person down. So, the next one would have to be either Himiko, Maki, or Samugi. Maki was a no-go. She was already probably blaming herself enough. It wasn't fair to put that kind of stress on her, even if she'd forget it in just a few minutes. Himiko was directly involved in the case as well, in addition to her being nearly impossible to wake up at such ungodly hours. That left just one. It'll be fine, he tried to reassure his pounding heart. The murder already happened. Logically, she has no reason to kill me. Samugi would be the easiest one to wake up, and the only one who wasn't directly involved in the case. She would run straight to the crime scene, no questions asked. Of course Maki would too, but she would think that it was Kaito who died. She would blame herself the entire way there. Shuichi didn't want to do that to her. His mind made up, he steeled his nerves and rang Samugi's doorbell. His entire body was shaking as he waited, unable to bury the phantom feeling of that hammer colliding with the side of his head. He was sure his skull had broken. Everything had faded out almost instantaneously when it happened. What would have happened if he stayed dead? Would his classmates have tried to solve his murder, or focus on who they assumed was Kaito's? After all, he was sure Kaito was much more beloved by everyone, and it'd be a smart move on Samugi's part to use the school rules to skirt around the consequences of her deed. Shuichi was useful, but he wasn't sure if he was liked. He'd hoped they'd at least be upset, if anything. What a waste of a kill! That's what Monokuma had said when Tenko was murdered. Shuichi would have been a waste of a kill. The door opened slowly, making Shuichi jump. Shuichi? Samugi mumbled, rubbing her eyes. Do you need something? And why do you look so sad? Someone's dead in the hangar, Shuichi told her, with no emotion in his voice. He pointed in the general direction of the door outside, unable to meet her eyes. Kibo's already there. What? Someone's dead? Samugi cried out in horror. Shuichi hated to think that he would have been fooled if he didn't know that she was likely the one who wanted this. Who? How did you even find out? I'll wake up everyone else, Shuichi reassured her, a tad bit impatiently. Please. Okay. Samugi looked perturbed by his behavior, but nevertheless she took off running. Satisfied that his work was done, Shuichi leaned against the closest wall, staring blankly ahead of him. He wondered if each time loop was draining his energy somehow, because it shouldn't be possible to be this tired on a mere 24-hour lack of sleep. Whatever, it didn't matter. Now, all he had to do was wait. Loop number 9. This would probably be the last one. This was probably an absolutely insane idea, but he was doing the best he could with such little energy, so hear him out. The main goal of this loop was to not let Kaito get shot. Disabling Kokichi was a good thing to do, as much as Shuichi didn't want to hurt him. Not letting Kaito get shot required allowing Kokichi to be shot twice, once by Kaito, and once by Maki's poisoned arrow. So this idea was riding on the hope that Maki would listen to him if he intervened and told her that Kokichi wasn't the mastermind. She'd hopefully fetch the antidote when she realized Kokichi was mostly innocent. No matter how much Kokichi did to them, Gonta especially, killing him wouldn't end the killing game. Shuichi needed Maki to realize that. Disable Kokichi, save Kaito, convince Maki to spare him, and then make sure Kokichi can't enact his plan. I'm sorry, Kokichi, but I'm not letting you win this time. While Shuichi was waiting for Maki to enter the hangar, he tried mulling over different plans as well, just in case this one failed. Simply talking Maki out of her plan and then speaking with Kaito and Kokichi might work, but Shuichi's main concern was that Kokichi wasn't going to listen to him. His mind might already be made up, and if Shuichi couldn't get into the hangar, then it would all be over. Using Maki would let him get into the hangar and disable Kokichi, at least long enough for Shuichi to make sure he wouldn't try anything. That probably meant he was going to have to stay awake all night to monitor Kokichi. The thought was already making him feel tired. The sound of the doors opening made him jump, and Shuichi almost missed Maki with how fast she was moving. He stayed close to the wall, watching as she sped down the hallway and towards the exosols, electrohammer and crossbow in hand. Shuichi trailed after her, a little more slowly, cautiously peeking around the corner. Maki moved efficiently, that's for sure. The closest exosol to her was the green one, which she lunged at with the ferocity of a waiting snake striking its prey. As the electrohammer made contact with the exosol, it jerked backwards, slightly, before ceasing to move at all. Tossing her drained electrohammer to the side, Maki climbed up and into the cockpit. Shuichi quickly ducked back around the corner, not wanting to risk being caught. He waited until he heard those loud, thudding footsteps break away from the others, before he started moving. His timing was going to have to be quick. He'd wait until K1B0 went by, and then book it for the hangar. That way, he'd arrive pretty much right on time. Maki was reasonable. He tried to reassure himself. She had at least some faith in Shuichi's deductions, so she'd listen to him when he told her that Kokichi wasn't the mastermind.
While I'm gone, you gotta support everyone, especially Makiro. She can be reckless sometimes.
Shuichi really hoped that his exhaustion hadn't made him overlook anything. As soon as K1B0 passed by, Shuichi was running, almost tripping over his own feet the minute he started moving. From the circling exosols to the hangar, it wasn't far, but it sure felt that way when his task was so dire.
Told you everything!
He heard Kokichi spat as he arrived at the open shutter, not even bothering to hide himself.
What else do you want me to tell you? My tragic backstory? Don't mess around with me!
Maki shouted at the boy.
I'm sick of playing your stupid games! Why would you start the killing game? How many people have to die for you to be satisfied?
Now, if I don't speak up now, it's ruined. Shuichi didn't project his voice very often, especially not when he was so tired. But, Maki! That,
actually seemed to surprise her. All three sets of eyes immediately turned towards him as he began walking into the hangar. His heart was pounding wildly, uncertainty and anxiety making his entire body shake. "Shuichi?" Maki questioned, her red eyes narrowing into slits. "My knight in shining armor!" Kokichi chortled, though his eyebrows were pinched in pain, and his smile was pulled taut. Before Maki could turn back towards him, Shuichi spoke again. "Wait, please! Listen, Kokichi isn't the mastermind!" Kaito shot him a bewildered look. At the same time, Maki glowered at him, her gaze feeling absolutely suffocating. "What are you talking about?" Maki demanded lowly, her voice sending shivers down Shuichi's spine. "Kokichi pretended to be the mastermind," Shuichi told her. "Please, Maki, if you kill him, you're going to start the killing game again." Kaito glanced between them, Maki and Kokichi, visibly puzzled. "Pretended?" "The killing game won't start again," Maki insisted, her crossbow leveled dangerously with Kokichi's head. "When I kill the mastermind, it'll all be over." "No! He's not the mastermind!" Shuichi exclaimed urgently. "That remote he has to control the exosouls? Mew made that! Everything he's done up till now has been preparation for this exact situation! He has a plan! And if that plan happens, it's going to kill him and Kaito!" Maki's head snapped towards him, a brief look of despair on her face. It was gone as soon as it came through, solidifying back into cold judgment. "What the hell are you talking about, Shuichi?" Kaito asked him. "You're talking total nonsense. And you look like shit, man. Have you slept?" "I'm not going to listen to your delusions," Maki growled, turning back towards Kokichi. "The killing game, your tricks, the remnants of despair. Tell me everything you know." Kokichi blinked owlishly up at her. "The who?" Damn it, why wasn't she listening? If Shuichi let this continue, Kokichi was going to end up running his mouth and getting himself shot. And then he'd screwed himself and probably Kaito over. Gritting his teeth in irritation, Shuichi hurried forwards, only stopping when he was in front of Kokichi. He turned sharply on his heel and held out his arm, meeting Maki's eyes and trying not to look too hard at the end of her crossbow. "What are you doing?" Maki asked him as he eyed her finger, which was still pressed threateningly on the crossbow's trigger. "Don't tell me you're protecting Kokichi?" "I'm not moving," Shuichi told his friend simply. "Please, listen to me, Maki. These aren't just delusions. Kokichi isn't the mastermind. Killing him is not going to end the killing game." "What are you judging this based off of?" Maki demanded. "Where did you even get this idea? No matter how suspicious his way of showing it was, it's undeniable that Kokichi is the mastermind." "Because of a remote one of our classmates made?" Shuichi challenged. "You should know that there's no way Kokichi is going to tell you anything. And that's because he can't. He doesn't know any more than we do." Maki's gaze was dark as she gazed at Shuichi, her eyes contemplative. She glanced at Kaito, who had backed a fair distance away and was watching everything go down in shocked silence. And then down at Kokichi, whose expression Shuichi couldn't see. Judging from his silence, though, Shuichi could only imagine how confused he was. "Think about it," Shuichi all but pleaded. "We only think that Kokichi is the mastermind because he told us so. Monokuma hasn't confirmed anything. Actually, we haven't seen Monokuma since he told us he was the mastermind." Shuichi realized at that moment. "Why are you protecting him?" Maki asked, instead of giving him a proper reply. "Where did you learn this information from?" I... Shuichi trailed off, knowing he wouldn't be able to answer that without sounding completely insane. You won't believe me, but please,
Trust me on this. Kokichi is not the mastermind.
Maki still looked doubtful. But at least she was hesitating. Shuichi risked glancing over at Kaito for help, who seemed to be entirely lost on the conversation.
Shuichi, I'm not sure what you're thinking.
Maki began slowly, and for a split second, Shuichi thought she had come around.
But something about you just isn't right now. Did Kokichi talk to you before this?
What? I'm being serious, Maki. If we ask Monokuma, or maybe if we confront the real mastermind, she'll tell us something.
Shuichi! Kaito interrupted him, and even he looked concerned. I want to trust you, man, but even I can tell something is seriously up. Maki's eyes were dark.
I wouldn't put it past the mastermind to threaten someone into protecting him.
What the hell kind of wild conclusion is that?
Shuichi barked, genuinely a little mortified.
Kokichi didn't tell me to do anything. Kaito, would you let Maki kill someone? Even if it was the mastermind?
Before Kaito could respond, or Shuichi could do anything, he felt a hand on his shoulder from behind.
Shuichi,
Kokichi murmured.
Thanks. You're such an unexpectedly useful pawn.
Shuichi's blood ran cold.
See? I don't need my exisals to stop you.
Kokichi sneered at Maki.
I have my trusty sidekick, who'd take a bullet for me any day. So, if you want to kill me, if you really love killing that much, you'll have to shoot Shuichi.
The tension was so thick, it could be cut with a knife, and even that would be hard. Shuichi and Kokichi stared down Maki and Kaito, who had joined the assassin's side while Kokichi was talking. Shuichi's body wouldn't stop shaking. His skin was boiling, and yet everything beneath it felt cold as ice. If Shuichi moved, Maki would kill Kokichi with no hesitation. That would restart the loop, and Shuichi would have to do this all over again.
What will it be, Maki?
Kokichi urged the assassin, squeezing Shuichi's shoulder slightly. The gesture would be reassuring, if it weren't for what Kokichi was doing. I can't let him take advantage of the situation like this. Kokichi, stop!
Are you going to shoot your friend to kill the mastermind?
Kokichi spoke over him, his voice smooth, in an almost mocking kind of tone.
Or are you going to take Kaito and leave while you still can? Because...
He held something up, and Shuichi realized, with a jolt, that it was the exisal remote.
If you don't...
Kaito shot an alarmed look at the still exisal behind him, but Maki didn't avert her gaze. Her eyes were trained solely on the remote in Kokichi's hands.
Do you want to die?
Shuichi snapped at the boy behind him, lowering his voice to not be heard by his friends.
Knock it off, Kokichi!
Now you sound like Maki,
Kokichi replied, almost teasingly, sharing his volume.
Protecting the mastermind? Really, Shuichi? I didn't think you'd sink so low.
You're not the mastermind. I heard you tell Kaito. You explained how you did it. Shuichi groaned in frustration. I think I know who the real mastermind is, but I can't tell you that if you get yourself killed. Kokichi arched an eyebrow at him.
I did what now? Shuichi!
Maki called to him, before Shuichi could fumble to correct his mistake. There was a strange glint in her eyes, one that immediately put Shuichi on edge.
Kaito, can you run?
Kaito blinked at her. Maki?
In Shuichi's lab, there's an antidote for strychnine poison on the desk closest to the poison cabinet.
Maki explained.
Go get it. Now.
Despite how conflicted Kaito looked, he nodded hurriedly, shooting Shuichi one last confident grin before running out of the hangar with uneven footsteps. Much to his surprise, Kokichi allowed Kaito to leave. The exisal stayed perfectly still.
Of course you'd have to complicate things, Shuichi.
Maki sighed as Kaito left.
You always do. I don't know what Kokichi said to you, but it doesn't matter. I'm going to fight. To protect my friends. I'm going to kill the mastermind.
Panic seized Shuichi's entire body. No! Maki! He's not the mastermind! The message in the courtyard, the remote, what he did to Mew and Gonta, they're all part of his plan to pretend to be the mastermind. Disregard the fact he's a remnant of despair for 1 second, and it makes sense, doesn't it? Why would he tell us he's the mastermind? Why would... There was a sharp prick in his left arm, spiraling bursts of pain exploding from that spot. He couldn't help but cry out, his hand flying to that spot, where he was horrified to discover an arrow in. Maki shot him. She shot him with a poisoned arrow. Shuichi! Kokichi yelped, momentarily seeming just as shocked as he was. He caught Shuichi as he stumbled, his legs feeling weak.
Wow, Maki is a cold-hearted killer. I guess that's what you can expect from an assassin, though.
This loop is doomed. Shuichi felt lightheaded. He could all but feel the poison spreading through his body, like a slow, growing wildfire that would soon consume him whole. I can't save both of us. This loop is doomed. Damn it! If Kokichi had just kept his mouth shut! And suddenly, as the arrow came, Maki was there, pulling him away from Kokichi and tackling the boy to the floor. Shuichi collapsed onto his knees, his eyes stuck to the ground. He failed. Again. And this time, it was because of his own incompetence. If he had tried a little harder, if he hadn't allowed Kokichi to twist the situation on him, then maybe Maki would have believed him. Maybe it all would have ended. Kokichi choked out behind him. Even if you kill me now, won't it be too late for your friends? Shut up! I'm not listening to you! Maki snarled. Hurry up and die! Kokichi's voice was weak and breathy, as if he was choking out every word with all the strength he had left. Kaito is being pursued by this exorcist as we speak. What? They're on their way right now. Kokichi wheezed, though there was a triumphant note in his voice. By the time you kill me, Kaito will have been ripped apart by the exorcist, and Shuichi will die from the poison. There was a thud, and Kokichi let out a strangled gasp, heavy pants coming from his direction. Shuichi glanced over his shoulder, seeing that Maki had stood up entirely, her eyes wide in horror. He's trying to drive her out of the hangar, Shuichi recognized. Kaito will be fine. He just wants to close the shutter. How much are they really worth to you? Kokichi challenged the assassin, his voice raspy. Kill me? Or kill your friends? Trying. Fuck you! Maki spat at the boy, her voice dripping with such venom, such hatred, that it sent a chill even down his spine. She didn't say much after that, though. Maki turned on her heel and bolted out of the hangar, abandoning Shuichi with someone who he was sure would soon be dead. Unless I die first. Shuichi could only assume that every loop took a little more energy from him. So between that, his lack of sleep, and his failure to eat anything, it was only a matter of time. Shuichi didn't want to die. He didn't want to go through that again. He didn't want to feel that way. The cut-off of life, of all sense of being. The thought was too terrifying to fathom. The sound of the shutter closing made Shuichi's head lift. He saw Kokichi by the control panel within the hangar. His neck looked redder than what could be normal. Maki must have been trying to choke him to death.
Shuichi,
Kokichi said sweetly, turning to face him. There was a pleasant smile on his face, but his words were anything but.
I am really, really mad at you right now.
You know what? Screw maintaining his composure. I was trying to keep everyone alive, you jerk! Shuichi snarled, glaring as hard as he could at the seemingly unaffected boy. You just had to ruin it! You always ruin it! Why couldn't you just shut up for once? Kokichi didn't reply. He was staring at Shuichi with a frustratingly pensive look, as if mulling through the possibilities in his head. Shuichi had noticed that he had a tendency to do that whenever he was contemplating something. His expression wiped itself blank, and he went quiet for a few moments.
I locked Maki and Kaito out, Kokichi reminded him coolly. There's no way you're getting the antidote.
Shuichi grit his teeth. I know. Again, Kokichi went silent. His expressions were always hard to discern genuinity from, but this was one of those less common instances that Shuichi could confidently say that Kokichi was downright confused.
Huh. You're not fun when you're pouting,
Kokichi moped. He lightened back up quickly, though Shuichi could tell his heart wasn't in the act.
It's not my problem if you want to die that badly, though. So, if you don't mind, I'll drink the antidote. 'Kay?
Shuichi very much did mind, and even though he knew it wouldn't make much of a difference, he couldn't help the instinctive need to survive, desperately waiting for the antidote. Guaranteed safety. Maki intended to give him the antidote from the very start. Sending Kaito to get it wasn't just her way of making sure he wouldn't be an obstacle in such a controversial decision. But if Kokichi was thinking what Shuichi thought he was thinking, then the antidote would wind up back in his hands anyway.
It really is unfortunate,
Kokichi continued talking, if only to fill the air of silence.
I mean, she shot you because she was confident you'd get the antidote in time. For someone who was trying to prevent a killing, you sure want to die pretty badly, huh?
I don't want to die, Shuichi corrected him sharply.
Then, why don't you want the antidote?
Kokichi questioned.
Why protect the mastermind? You're not usually the type to contradict yourself, Shuichi. I'm really not liking this new personality development.
Shuichi brought the hand of his uninjured arm to his face, covering his mouth as he stared helplessly at the floor. He was acting a little strange. He knew that. But surely he'd understand if he knew about the time loops, and why Shuichi had given up so quickly. Faintly, he wondered how long it would take for this poison to kill him.
Whatever it is,
Kokichi sighed, approaching Shuichi. He placed a hand on his shoulder, and Shuichi realized that it was trembling, ever so slightly.
It worked in my favor. Thanks, Shuichi. I'm in your debt.
For your plan, right? Shuichi gasped bitterly. You'll give me the Kokichi's hand flew to cover his mouth. His expression didn't change, but there was a warning glint in his eyes that motivated Shuichi to stop talking immediately.
Don't you think it's unfair to start spilling my secrets, just 'cause you're a mind reader now?
Kokichi pouted, and although his tone was lightened, his solemn countenance spoke volumes in itself.
Those are secrets for a reason, Shuichi. No one's supposed to know them.
Shuichi understood the message. Kokichi didn't want him talking about his plan out loud. He didn't need to know why it mattered, since it was only the two of them here. But he didn't have the energy to argue with Kokichi about it. As long as Kokichi knew that he knew, that's all that would matter. Reluctantly, he nodded. Kokichi pulled his hand away, granting Shuichi the right to speak once more. Silence fell over the hangar. Shuichi had nothing left to say. He just wanted this loop to end already. No matter who drank the antidote, it would all be meaningless in the end. Time would reset, and Shuichi would have to do it all over again. Maybe just talking will work. If I can convince Maki not to come to the hangar, then I stay at the bathroom window and beg Kaito not to attack Kokichi. I'd have to stay there to make sure he doesn't, but I'm sure Kokichi would somehow find a way to make him do it anyway. He'd probably threaten me to get Kaito to do what he wants. This plan could work again, so long as I make sure Kokichi doesn't start talking. And if I try to act a little more rationally... Shuichi! The sudden, thunderous voice made him jump, violently yanking him back into reality. His head automatically turned towards the open bathroom door. Kaito?
Took them long enough,
Kokichi commented dryly.
Your delivery arrived, Shuichi. You're not going to leave them hanging, are you? Even if they totally deserve it for shooting you and then abandoning you with the mastermind.
She only shot me because she thought Kaito would be back to give me the antidote. She only left because she couldn't risk you actually being truthful. Shuichi didn't bother to tell him this, though. Kokichi would refuse to understand, unless he did understand, and was just trying to get on Shuichi's nerves, in which case it was working fabulously. Ripping the arrow out of his arm and gripping it tightly with his other hand, Shuichi struggled to his feet. The ground felt uneven beneath him, which certainly didn't help the feeling of nausea that had begun to build in the back of his throat. If Shuichi drank the antidote, then Kokichi would die, and the loop would begin anew. If Kokichi drank the antidote, then Shuichi would die, and the loop would restart anyway. It was a lose-lose situation. Slowly, he looked down at the arrow. The tip was very sharp. No wonder it had hurt so bad to be shot with. He could end the loop right now. It'd only take a few minutes to bleed out if he hit the right spot. I don't want to die. I really don't want to die. But the sooner this loop ends, the better. Shuichi didn't want to progress any further. If he was replacing Kaito's role in Kokichi's plan, then his friends would have to watch Kokichi falsely drink the antidote. They would think that he was going to die, and it was Maki who had killed him. If he allowed this to continue any further, then it would be Shuichi who crushed Kokichi in the hydraulic press. That realization was what kept Shuichi's feet planted in place, no longer moving towards the bathroom. Shuichi would crush Kokichi in the hydraulic press. Shuichi would kill Kokichi. Death was scary, sure, but Shuichi couldn't possibly fathom the idea of killing someone, taking another person's life, even if they asked him to. How could he willingly inflict that on someone? Shuichi wanted to stop more death from happening, not participate in causing it. It'd only last for a few moments. His senses would come back to him.
Shuichi?
But it hurt. It hurt so bad. It wouldn't be an immediate lights out like it had been when Tsumugi killed him. It'd be slow, and he'd have to feel every moment of pain that came from it. Looking back at Kokichi, though, how alive he was. Shuichi genuinely could not imagine it. He had seen so many dead bodies because of this killing game, and he didn't think he'd ever have the strength to do that to one of his friends, much less Kokichi. As troublesome and downright cruel as he had been in this killing game, he wanted to end the killing game as much as Shuichi did.
Shuichi?
Kokichi tried again, cocking his head to the side.
You're zoning out harder than you usually do. Did you hit your head or something? Are you acting weird 'cause you have brain damage?
I can't kill you, Shuichi whispered. He clenched his fists tighter until he could feel his nails digging into his palms. I can't kill you, Kokichi. I'm sorry. I can't end the loop like that.
Kill me?
Kokichi echoed.
My dear Shuichi, was planning to kill me? Why is the entire Kaito fan club after me? What are you doing?
There were 2 places that, if he stabbed or cut just right, he'd be dead within minutes. His arms didn't have much strength to them, so he figured stabbing himself with the arrow would be easier than cutting through his skin. His heart was pounding as he brought the arrow to his neck, reminding himself over and over that he would be back. It would only be for a few moments. Do it, before you talk yourself out of it. If he hesitated any longer, Kokichi was going to stop him. So he took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and swung. Shuichi! Oh, it hurt. It hurt so bad. This was going to be something that stuck with him. The sharp feeling of the tip of the arrow ripping through his skin, blood filling his throat and making him choke. Utter agony made his vision momentarily go white. And yet, somehow, he was able to pull the arrow back out, though this was even harder than actually doing the stabbing. His hand was slick with blood. His blood. It hurts. Oh my God, that hurts. But the loop will end, so it's good. I didn't have to kill anyone but myself. It's not stopping. Please, make it stop. Did I hit an artery? Did it work? Someone caught him as his legs buckled, and he recognized that person as Kokichi. He was lowered to the floor gently, but hurriedly, and he felt pressure on his neck. No! Shuichi, what the hell? Kokichi was shouting at him. Why did you do that? Don't close your eyes on me! Any moment now. Shuichi did not have the strength to fight. He was sleep-deprived. There was poison circulating through his body. And now, blood was pouring out of his throat. He was going to die. But it's okay. I'll come back. Knowing he would come back didn't make it any less scary. Watching the edges of his vision fade out. For such a small arrow, it certainly did work fast. But Kokichi was slowing down the process. Logically, Shuichi couldn't blame him. But couldn't he see that he was trying to die? He needed to restart the loop. He wanted this pain to end. The hot feeling of blood on his neck. The feeling of it seeping from his body. From both his neck and his arm. Kokichi was frantically speaking, an endless onslaught of words that were entirely lost to Shuichi. There was a strange, fuzzy feeling overtaking his mind, making it difficult to even think. Breathing hurt. But that was because he kept choking on the air that tried to enter his lungs. The pressure on his neck disappeared, replaced by something even warmer. Inevitably, though, it was all gone. Waking up this time was less scary than the last. That wasn't why he was panicking. Instead, it was the blood, all over his neck. Shuichi ran to the bathroom as soon as he could, throwing off his overcoat and grabbing a towel. It wasn't bleeding as badly as before, nor did it even hurt as bad, but just the sight of so much pink covering his neck, white shirt and chin, was enough to elevate his heart rate. It was an open wound, but only on the surface level, like getting a paper cut, or accidentally pricking yourself with a sharp edge. Despite covering the phantom of the killing wound, Shuichi couldn't stop shaking. That was one question answered. He supposed suicide would not end the loops. Instead, it gave him an automatic reset button. One stab to a vital artery, and he'd be right back where he started. The thought made him shudder. There was no way he was doing that again. I guess that also confirms my body doesn't reset with each loop, Shuichi mused, with a scowl, risking pulling away the towel. It was difficult to tell with all the blood what was still there, but he was pretty sure it was okay now. Going out like this would raise a hell of a lot of alarms. He should take a shower. Nodding to himself, Shuichi stumbled out of his bathroom, trying to occupy his thoughts with only what he was going to do next. If he started thinking too hard, he'd start thinking about the vast emptiness of death and the horrified look on Kokichi's face when he stabbed himself. Nope, moving on. Distraction. Grabbing his clothes and a clean towel, Shuichi began running the water. He'd have to be quick about this. He only had so much time until Himiko went to the hangar. If he was going for the less involved, talk-it-out strategy, he'd have to get there before her or intercept her on her way there. Quick shower. Then he'd be on his way. He was not on his way. In fact, he didn't even get to his door before he had to sit against the wall, too sick to even see straight. As he laid on the floor in a new loop, clutching his chest and breathing shakily, he could only speculate as to what had happened. He knew he died. He had visited that eerie emptiness again, and he heard the bells to the nighttime announcement once more. That was 2 loops that ended in death in a row, and he hardly even got 30 minutes through the last one. Arguably, that last death had been worse. While he felt his consciousness fade out when he was bleeding out, he lost whole bouts of memory from last time. He just remembered his entire body aching for a little bit as he laid on the ground, until the next thing he remembered clearly was the loop restarting. His throat convulsed, and he felt his body lurch, though nothing came up. He parted his lips again, panting hard, and trying not to cry. His skin felt like it was on fire, and his lungs felt much too small for any of the air he was desperately trying to take in. Shuichi had a theory. It related to the time loops and the massive mistake he made in committing suicide. In his selfishness to not progress that attempt any further, he killed himself without facing his friends. He killed himself with the Strike 9 poison still in his body, slowly killing him from the inside. Death from a physical wound was one thing. His body seemed to heal that over as much as it could between each loop. But if he died from something inside him... His stomach rolled, and his throat felt as if it ripped from how hard he heaved. He could feel bile in the back of his mouth, coating his tongue in a foul taste. But it wasn't coming out. It wasn't like he could move. Even breathing was agonizing. So, how was he supposed to manually trigger his gag reflex? He was stuck. It was kind of comfortable on the floor. It felt nice to rest his head on something for once. And closing his eyes did help against the nausea. I'm going to die again anyway. What's the point of trying? Next time, I have to stop this. Maybe I'll just fall asleep until I die. Shuichi woke up, feeling less rested than before. Also, he immediately threw up. I need that antidote, he thought miserably, trying not to let the stench of his own vomit let him gag again. He averted his eyes and pushed himself back onto his feet, swaying as he stumbled a few steps forward. He was so dizzy. I can't go on like this. I can't die again. It was too much. That emptiness grew more and more unwelcoming the more he was plunged into it. He couldn't let himself die for a 3rd time in a row. Please, not again. He opened his bedroom door and forced his feet forward. The emptiness of death was becoming less empty because he felt it every time he visited it. You'd think dying more than once would make it less scary, but this was torture. Every waking moment was worse than the last, and death wasn't even an escape for him anymore. If he fell asleep, he'd die and wake right back up. If he died, he'd come back to life with the next loop. There was no escape. He couldn't get away from this cycle. He needed to end it while he could move his body. His lab was on the 5th floor of the school, though. How the hell was he going to make it up there in time? The poison would tear through his insides again, until his heart ceased to work. He didn't want to test how many times he'd have to die before the poison burned itself out. The antidote. I need the antidote. There was one person who would be able to find it. She was just one flight of stairs away from him, and she could move fast. All Shuichi had to do was get up there as quickly as he could. Getting up the stairs was a bit of a humiliating feat, mostly since he less walked up them and more of crawled up them. He stopped midway to catch his breath and regain as much of his sense of balance as he could, and then he was moving again. Shuichi knocked weakly on her door before remembering to ring her doorbell. He rang it twice before having to place his palm on the wall as a support, feeling dangerously close to throwing up. He came this close to passing back out when she opened the door. Shuichi was quick to seize her by her shoulders, desperate not to let himself fall. "Maki!" he pleaded, his voice breaking. I need the antidote to strike 9 poison." A look of alarm filtered across Maki's face. "Shuichi? You were poisoned? Hurry, please. I don't want to die." "Lean against the wall and close your eyes," Maki instructed him as she gracefully guided him into her room, placing his back against the wall. She momentarily pressed her hand against his forehead before drawing back. "Take in slow breaths. I'll be right back." Shuichi nodded, following her instructions. "Oh, okay." Quick-paced, light footsteps signaled to Shuichi that she had left. He leaned his head against the wall as well, putting as much focus as he could into breathing in a calm, steady pace. He prayed that Maki would move quickly. While left on his own, his body felt warm. His knees were shaking, struggling to hold him up, even with the support of the wall. His hands and shoulder kept twitching, and his tongue felt too big for his mouth, which was making him gag. He'd feel bad if he threw up on Maki's floor, but he didn't know if he had any other choice. He couldn't breathe. Just like the last few times, his memory was hazy, and he came to again when he realized he was on the floor now, someone sitting next to him. "Himiko?"
"Shuichi?"
Himiko asked him worriedly. Her hand was on his shoulder.
"Oh, you looked at me. That's good. I asked if you're okay."
Her voice was distant. Crap, that wasn't good. He probably only had a matter of minutes. If Maki didn't get back soon, he was going to die. When he tried to respond to Himiko, his words only came out as a pained, incoherent moan, and he let his head droop. Words were too hard.
"You're responding,"
Himiko observed, her shoulders slacking in relief.
"Thank goodness. When I got here, you were twitching on the floor, so I helped you up and wiped the drool off your chin."
Shuichi attempted to thank her.
"Do you know where Maki went?"
Himiko continued to question him, seeming to not get the memo that he was pretty much incapable of actual speech right now. He tried once more. As he expected, Himiko looked a little lost, but she seemed to understand that she wasn't going to be getting any coherent answers from him, so she thankfully laid off the questions.
"It sounds like she'll be back, so I'll keep you company until then,"
Himiko reassured him mildly.
"Don't worry. Whatever's going on, you'll be okay. I cast a healing spell on you while you were waking up. It was kind of small, but it should help for a little while."
Shuichi nodded, simply to show that he was listening.
"Healing spells are one of the harder spells to learn,"
Himiko went on to tell him about her magic, the different types, and eventually getting into which one was her favorite. Shuichi had a difficult time keeping up, but he didn't think she intended him to. He was pretty sure she was trying to give him a coherent stream of background noise to focus on. When he started to become afraid, he shifted his hand to weakly latch onto hers. If she commented on it, Shuichi had no idea. He could barely register anything right now. His vision was blurry, and everything sounded like it was underwater. But at least it was a little less scary to die when he was with someone. He and Himiko weren't necessarily close with one another, not like he was with Kaito or Maki, but she was still by his side, as he felt life begin to seep from his body. And for that, he felt content. That was, until someone pried open his mouth and forced his head back. Then, everything felt a little less relaxed. There was no strength in his body to try and fight it, so he simply sat there and allowed this tangy liquid to pour down his throat. He wanted to grimace, to whine or protest or do something, but the last bit of consciousness he had left told him that this was good. That blurry figure looming over him was good, because her red eyes were alight with determination and concern. That's all. The bottle left in his mouth, and before he could gasp for air, his mouth was shut by a strong hand, keeping his head tilted upwards. Swallow it. All of it. Come on, Shuichi. At this point, he wasn't sure if it'd matter. If he couldn't even connect a name to this voice, then he was already too far gone. But it was okay if he died. Even if his body was too weak to survive this loop, it was okay, because the antidote would continue to fight for him, even after he died. Yes, he was okay with this, because death was not permanent. Every step was more uncertain than the last, but with the antidote to Strike 9 gripped tightly in his hand, Shuichi had thought up a plan. He did die again, and while it wasn't as scary as the previous 2 times, it still made his heart twist with grief. That was 4 times he had forced his classmates to deal with his demise, 3 of which he had died in front of them. But not again. Shuichi would not let that happen again, because he was going to end the time loops right here and now. This couldn't go wrong. Shuichi wouldn't allow it to. The shutter was open when he arrived. Kaito was watching Maki hold and interrogate Kokichi at the end of her crossbow, loaded dangerously with another poisoned arrow. Shuichi's skin crawled at the sight. No, his throat was already sore from vomiting so much. That's why he wasn't wearing his overcoat and only his white-collared shirt. And, at the very least, his theory was right. Maki got the antidote into his system just in time, so when the next loop came around, the current loop, he was already fighting off the poison. His entire body hurt, and he was so exhausted he was starting to legitimately hallucinate. But he was alive. He was cured. He wouldn't throw up anymore. He saw the moment Kaito and Kokichi spotted him enter the hangar, because the color drained from both of their faces. Maki glanced from Kokichi to Kaito, before craning her neck to peer over her shoulder, and even she lowered her crossbow, her eyes wide. Shuichi pointed the gun at Kaito, his throat aching, as he asserted his voice. If anyone moves, Kaito dies.